Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He also serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. His new book, Uncontrolled Spread, Why COVID-19 Crushed Us and How We Can Defeat the Next Pandemic, is out this month. And I've given up on the gain-of-function discussion, Scott, because if you're going to say from the outset that it only applies to research on human viruses to change what they're able to do, so that if you're working on a bat virus that suddenly becomes a human virus because of what you've done, that's not gain of function. So we're going to get nowhere with that. Either way, it seems to me that very little, at least I guess the thought was, and I think Fauci's actually quoted or had a research piece that said the benefit from us discovering how it would turn into a human virus outweighed the benefit of whether we'd create something. That obviously wasn't the case.
Well, look, the discussion around whether or not this was gain of function is a political and legal discussion. I think at a practical level, the bottom line is they were doing research on viruses in that institute that was making those viruses potentially more dangerous to humans.
Exactly.
And handling the viruses in ways that could have potentiated their release, particularly by infecting transgenic animals that had fully humanized immune systems, which we now know and were revealed by that, sort of affirmed by those documents. We knew this before. So they were doing things in that lab that could have led to circumstances where a virus that was purposely evolved in ways that it could be more dangerous in humans could have escaped. And I think the bottom line is we have a long record of that lab having poor practices. In fact, when that lab was first opened, there was an editorial in the journal Science raising questions about the integrity of that lab. There were questions about whether the lab was built appropriately and just the procedures that they had in place. So the conditions existed where an accident could have happened. I think what's revealed by these documents in The Intercept are two interesting details that I previously didn't know. First, there was experimentation being done on MERS-like coronaviruses, not just SARS-like coronaviruses. And second, they affirmed what we sort of suspected, which is that coronavirus research was going on in other institutes around Wuhan. They identified one in particular. Now, interestingly, they said that that research was going on in a level 3 biocontainment facility. I was under the impression most of the coronavirus research that the Chinese officials were doing were being done in level 2 labs. So at least some of it was going on in a level 3 lab. So that was actually an encouraging detail that they were taking additional precautions. But I think the bottom line is this issue around what is and isn't gain of function really from a practical standpoint isn't operative.
Yeah.
People are going to parse that definition to suit their own purposes.
If I were Dr. Fauci, I'd be defensive, too, about these things. I really would. You know, there's P4 labs. That's Ebola and other things, but obviously, aren't there? I mean, it's not, 3's not even the highest, is it? And this should have been at least 3. Probably should have been. Now we know Ebola never killed, millions and millions. Could. It has a potential. Let me ask you about, before we're not, I don't know where we're going to get on this. I want to talk about Mu. And there's a piece in the Daily News that made me feel a little bit better about it. And I wonder what do you know about Mu? It's how infectious it is. Is it more transmissible even than Delta? And does it appear to be less like the virus is weakening over time with each mutation?
Yeah, so far the Mu variant doesn't seem to be outcompeting Delta. And the conventional wisdom among a lot of experts who've looked at this is that Delta really is going to crowd out these other variants that we see right now. And people that I talk to don't seem overly concerned about the risk that one of these variants that we're tracking, like Mu, is going to somehow outcompete Delta and start racing around the world. It doesn't seem to have a competitive advantage. Most people believe that the next strain that we see, the next variant, is going to be something in the Delta lineage. That Delta itself, there's already 2 clades of Delta. That Delta itself is going to acquire some different features, or there's going to be an offshoot of Delta based on that backbone that acquires some different features, potentially can partially evade our prior immunity, and that's going to become the next variant that starts to spread. And you're not going to get full escape. You might get partial escape where a new version of Delta is able to partially evade the immunity that we've acquired either from infection and vaccination. So it begs the question whether or not, as we consider reformulating vaccines, whether or not we should be using a Delta backbone in the next vaccine that we do eventually develop, because we probably will have to evolve these vaccines over time. I tend to look at the genetic genetic epidemiologists, the people who are involved in this field of gen epi, who actually look at what the virus is doing around the world. I think they provide some of the best insights. So you look at a guy like Trevor Bedford at the Hutch. He put out a long thread yesterday about this. Rather than purely looking at the virologists who tend to look just at the virus and the features of the virus to try to draw conclusions, I think to get a really accurate picture, you have to talk to people who are looking at the virus itself, the virologists who understand viral features, and then the people who are actually watching how it's spreading around the world.